Thank you everyone for joining us today and for taking the time to read our land acknowledgements respective to all the participants in today's panel. We believe in being conscious about the land we live, work, and create on. So once again, welcome. My name is Aaliyah Aluma. I am the Associate Curator here at Contemporary Calgary, and we are delighted to be joined by a collection of wonderful artists whose work will be explored and discussed in today's panel, who are all part of the current exhibition, The Further Apart Things Seem, right now at Contemporary Calgary, curated by Jay Wilson and Shannon Anderson. That said, I'm going to hand the floor over to Jay and Shannon, who will introduce our moderators and kick off this panel.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jay Wilson.
I'm Shannon Anderson. Hello.
We thought we'd let you in on what's happening today. So when we decided to have an artist panel, we were thinking about how we would ask the questions or how we would approach the topic. And I said to Shannon that I felt like we had already had our say. And then, so I said, I wish somebody else would moderate it, not because we don't like public speaking, more just to keep it interesting for everybody. And then Shannon suggested Trevor Mahovsky and Rhonda Weppler, who we worked with on the Closer Together Things Are, which was our first show. And Trevor and Rhonda are in the current show at Contemporary Calgary called Rerouting. So we thought that that was a nice kind of crossover between our first curatorial effort and the awesome show that's on at the CC now.
Yeah, we're really excited to have Rhonda and Trevor here. We loved working with them. We love the idea of artists moderating a whole other group of artists who are all kind of sharing the space of Contemporary Calgary, but in different shows. So we're excited to see what comes from this.
So thank you very much.
Yeah, and we'll, with that said, I guess we'll pass it on to Rhonda and Trevor.
Hi.
Hi, Rhonda. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Thank you, Jay, and thank you, Shannon. So we're just going to get things rolling as quickly as possible. We only have an hour, so we'll just dive right into it. When we were asked to think about this show, my mind kept going back, to climate change, actually, to this idea that we have this civilizational problem and we've all got to come together somehow. And with examples of climate change or COVID and public health response, I'm sure all of us have found ourselves wondering, can we ever act together? Can we pull on the rope together? So, on the one hand, I have that. Bracketed on the other side of my mind is the idea that probably all of us who went into art, we went in because it was it had an important countercultural aspect to it, had an important aspect of critique, protest, of disagreement, productive disagreement. So, there's that tradition of art, which is not necessarily about consensus. So on the one hand, we have a need for empathy, community, tolerance. We have a need for consensus, as I said, but on the other hand, we have a need for those to mean anything. We also have to have a need for conflict in the form of alternatives, in the form of critique and resistance. We want difference. So today's exhibition, I think, is really interesting for me to think about relative to those epic problems. And today's exhibition is also interesting. Like Jay said, it's the result of a long, extended, and ever-expanding conversation. We're all in the conversation today. And we entered the conversation sort of with the Closer Together Things Are. And maybe I'm going to share my screen and we'll just take a very quick look. So we came on with this show 2017, 2018. I think there was 10 artists in there. And it seems like, as Jay calls it, this shows an interesting loose bookend to that. To me, it's a little bit like tackling the same set of questions, the same set of issues from either end of the problem. And I actually love that methodology. That's why I love being a part of this conversation. So here's an installation shot of that show about similarity, mimicry, nearness, right? And here's Ron and I working. when Rhonda and I, when we thought about our questions for this moderation, it came out of our own conversation. And we're going to present our questions jointly to reflect that conversation that we had. And I think it's really nice for us to do this because we have learned to work together. We've learned to work, actually we want to work, we must work together through a messy process of agreement, disagreement, physical distance, we live in different cities, sometimes physical proximity, and sometimes adopting each other's position, often in argument over the course of years since 2004. So Rhonda and I are truly close together and far apart in our own ways that we wouldn't have it any other way. And so that we're really excited to be part of this conversation. So with that said, Rhonda, I wonder if you would quickly walk us through the show.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Trevor. So loosely bookended to the closer things are, the further apart things seem asks us if we can use our differences to come closer together. So when you enter the space, so the space is a kind of interesting. It's this round tunnel, it's like an opaque wall in the center. You don't see inside that center. You walk through around this ring gallery. It's called ring gallery because it is a ring. And if you walk in and you move clockwise, or clockwise, so you could turn left. The first artist work you'll see is Anna Binta Diallo. So she is a Senegalese Canadian artist born in St. Boniface, but currently lives in Manitoba. And she uses collage to bring things together that are in conflict together.
So we're not going to sort of go into depth with the works. We're going to let the artists talk about the works and have it come out. But as you can see, there's this kind of narrative that emerges along the walls as kind of as you walk along Anna's installation.
And then you move on to Adriana Kuiper and Ryan Suter's work. So they are based in Sackville, New Brunswick, and they make silent works that refer to sound by using symbols of sound such as play, buttons, and sound waves, which are incorporated in quilt patterns. And these are combined surprisingly with video that also silently refer to sound.
So they have this kind of tactile presence, sculptural presence that's integrated with video, right? This really hybrid sense about them.
And then we come to Atanas Bozdarov's work. So Atanas walks with a cane and he wears leg braces and uses sculpture to reflect on the failure of accessibility of public space.
And Atlas's works, there's, documentary or neo-documentary, I'd have to actually ask Atlas what he thought. Images, there's sculptural works that are more abstracted or model-like, and there's elements that seem to be traces of activities. There's a mock accessibility reader. I hope this comes up in the discussion today, right? So there's these cane drawings, right? So there's a lot of different elements, all interrelated thematically.
And then we come to Brennan Satish Tang's work, and that's work that deals with ideas of identity, race, masculinity, and he mixes traditions of Joss paper birding as offering with Ford 150 culture.
And we should point out these are watercolor. There's sculptural watercolors, if you can wrap your mind around that.
And here we had Trevor and I were arguing. I thought these were actually burnt, but maybe Brennan, if you can correct us, are these faux finish burnt or are they actually burnt and then were blown out?
They're actually burnt.
Oh, I lose the argument. Okay.
Ah!
Okay. All right. Thank you, Brennan.
I looked very closely and I thought
that's enough, Brennan. Okay. So, and Brendan's incorporates a loop. You can see in the back there a looped video, which I thought had a beautiful relationship to the space of the gallery, loop of the gallery. So this is one shot from the video. Okay, then. And
then we move into Barbara Hobot's work. And so she's an artist interested in alchemy, and she creates these hybrid photo sculptures that, sorry. So this is an image of nets from the mountains of Peru, which are used to collect condensation in an attempt to counter water scarcity.
And Barbara's work is these beautiful elemental gestures, propping up an element, pinning up an element, and they have this resonance of an absolute flip and transformation of the materials and the image through this simple gesture.
And then the final artist that you move through into the space is Cuisine Van Goghen, and he's based in Bowmanville, Ontario, and he connects his Inuit heritage with Western processes and materials.
So Couzyn is an interesting endpoint to the loop, because there's this sort of dog bollard, and you think of bollards as marking out space and access and how you move through things. And his work interrupts the space in its own way. So it's interesting, you come out of the loop and you're in this space of transit. So hopefully we can get to some of these. So we want to thank Contemporary Calgary for putting on this terrific show and sponsoring the efforts of these artists, and Jay and Shannon. And we're really glad to be here to participate. Okay, so I think with that, Rhonda, we're going to dive in to
Right.
the questions. So if the artists are ready, let's get into a conversation. So our questions, like I said, they're collaborative. We asked them collaboratively, and we had them as a discussion. So we're going to ask them together, and then we're going to let a couple of artists respond. Whoever wishes to, put up your hand or shout or whatever works for you, and then we will keep it moving along. We don't all have to answer every question. That way we can get through as much as possible. So we're going to start the first question. So we wanted to keep this fixated on this particular instance of exhibition of your works. So we're at the occasion of a group exhibition, and that makes us start to think about processes of contextualizing your works. Around your works, now we have themes, now we have didactics, now we have, we have enhanced web info, we have a roundtable, right? All around your works. So I think, Ron and I are artists, and I think we have felt, maybe you agree or disagree with this, we sometimes feel a shift between what our work seems to be to us in our studio, in the beautiful mess of our studio, and what it seems to be when it is in a show. And so that's one thing. But then on the other hand, of course, we've come to think of curation as collaboration. When you enter into a show, you're kind of collaborating with the curator, and it's more common to think of curatorial work as artistic production in and of itself. So you have those two factors.
Right, so here's the question. Do you ever feel like your work is one thing when you make it and another when it is displayed or explained? If so, is that shift normally productive for you? Do you learn anything about your work? Do you see it as a fresh, see it unraveled, or see it from a distance? Or do you see the exhibition of work as a totally separate from the production of the work? Who wants to be brave? Oh,
Yeah,
who said that?
I can jump in, Brendan.
Okay, awesome, I like it, okay.
So the body of work that I did was originally a show that I had put together for the Nanaimo Art Gallery. And when I went into it, I thought it would be like, when I was gestating on the idea, I was during the Me Too movement and all that sort of stuff. And I was kind of really interested in interrogating toxic masculinity. And then as the work progressed, it became less about that sort of general idea and more of a critique on my own relationship with my own history and my own ethnic heritage. And that's where the work really landed for me. When I then put the show up in Calgary, it was during the convoy. And actually, I would set it up, and then I would go for lunch in Calgary, and I would hear the honking and the horns of the convoy as they went down the street. And the work pivoted to being this whole other kind of thing where, part of me was tempted to go find a paper Canadian flag to put on the side of my truck. But it was just like I think there is some really interesting thing about, especially with my work, I tend to play a lot with popular culture images. And so when I do that, they can be co-opted by other conversations that happening either currently or historically or whatever. And in a lot of ways, I enjoy that because it becomes like a lure or another access point for the audience. And so I don't mind it so much. And if people want to look into like my own feelings about the object, that can also be part of the conversation as well.
That's an interesting edge, because it's a slipperiness of a contemporary context that's changing so quickly that the resonance of your work is radically shifting from exhibition to exhibition. And I guess you're kind of courting that situation in the way you're working.
Yeah, I'm open to it because I
Yeah.
know that I can't control it.
Yeah, it's like, you know, public art, right? Yeah, I mean, I think of galleries as public spaces, and it's in a way kind of, you know, I mean, it's different than public art, but there's some aspect of public sphere there. Does anybody else have? Okay, Adriana.
Well, I was thinking about the question too, and Ryan and I for so long had been making public art work where it was meant to be viewed outdoors or in relationship to a specific site. So when this work that's shown at Calgary was being made, it was a real shift for us. And we were really thinking about making work to be seen in a gallery space, which we hadn't done for a really long time. And during that process, there were so many conversations of back and forth. And but I think we can really resonate with what Brendan's saying about how the work really shifted over the time in which it was being made because so much was happening in the world around us. So that really affected the work, and yeah, it just really changed.
Is your work the works and the references to you know, megaphones and this kind of that kind of information in the work, is that coming from that public context when you were working in public art? Did making public art affect your gallery work in that way, or no?
Not necessarily. I think a lot of the iconography in terms of those objects, I was kind of playing around with in terms of like using them as kind of personal kind of expressions of communication, language, the failure of communication, what happens when voices are kind of quieted down and things are amplified. So it was playing with those materials. But what was fascinating is like we were working on it, and then the women's movement, Black Lives Matter, all of this happens. Then it's fascinating because all of these things that had very specific connotations in the studio that I was playing with as material, or we were playing with, all of a sudden become something different. And we were talking a lot about it, but our position was like, well, we're just going to keep working on these things and kind of see where that kind of leads us. The interesting thing about, back to the question about, from us, I think it's this work, when it gets put into the context of a gallery situation, really kind of like artwork. I feel artworks are very organic and they sort of take things on, right? But what's also really fascinating is that when they get pulled out into a different show, they kind of start to shed that history, and they sort of take on this new history. So there's something really malleable and that I find quite illuminating in terms of your practice, in terms of the way we approach things now. So I think there's something really kind of fascinating about those shifts and how you kind of have to navigate that or not navigate it and just sort of let it be, sort of let it float along.
Actually, that leads nicely into the next question, because our next question is about resonances in the particular show. So maybe, does anybody else want to go ahead, Rhonda?
I was curious if anybody seems ever gets frustrated, because sometimes Trevor and I get frustrated when our work gets almost pigeonholed into being read a certain way, you know, or used for some kind of purpose that's sort of, I don't know, not what you really expected. Does anybody have that experience that they want to talk about? No.
I can say something.
Okay.
Oftentimes, like I'll get asked, you know, because there's a lot of images in my collage work. People will like assume, oh, is this about this or is it about that? And I prefer that people bring their own, I guess, history or vision or lens to the work than explaining it. So it's not maybe a frustration. It's more of like an expectation of like, how is the work going to be read and where is it going to be installed? Who's going to be there? Who's going to see it? But without, you know, letting some of that go as well, some of that control of like how you had it in your head and how they're going to interpret it. So yeah, I think that's like, it depends where you install it. But I think I experienced that as well. I don't know if
Actually, I think that folds back into the first question, in that idea that all the stuff around the work is kind of about a kind of intelligibility or readability of the work that is something that you go with and fight against at the same time. It's a point of access for people, but it's also, you want some resistance and opacity for your work to kind of have some space to be what it is, I guess. So should we go to the next question, Rhonda? What do you think?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. You seem doubtful.
Oh, I'm just thinking about the first one still.
Okay. Does anybody else
Still
want-
processing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe this will fold
and
back
this,
into that one.
see, and this is
I'm monitoring time.
good.
Okay. All right, let's do this. It's all going to fold together. It's all going to be one topic. Okay. So this exhibition asks us to think about cases.
No,
of
Adams, I think Adams had something to say.
Oh,
didn't
does he? Okay.
Oh, no, you did? Oh, I thought your hand was up.
I did, but we could move on. It's fine.
No, go ahead.
I was going to touch upon the question of if it's read differently. And I know sometimes my work can be seen as quite a bit of like an activist approach. And I kind of not that I step away from it, but I feel there are a lot of artists who are doing real activist work. And I try to be careful about that line and not touching that line and where my work kind of lands in that realm of activism or quiet activism. And yeah, so definitely, like I think like Anna said, the work can be read in different ways, and being careful of how people read it as well, and maybe correcting them sometimes I think is important for me as well, or not correcting, but maybe just letting them know it may not have been my exact intention to be read a certain way.
Yeah, when you look at your work, there's a lot of formal enjoyment there, and I think sometimes Trevor and I, our work gets sound bited into something. Oh, it's about this, and that's it. You don't want to look at it anymore. It's about that. The end. Maybe that's a little bit what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of play and humor in work, and I do think about these social issues that I'm talking about as being important to me and important to others, but also not to hit you over the head with them, and try to use humor and critical design and speculative design proposals to kind of touch on these ideas without making them too heavy. And I think there's something interesting about being in the exhibition with everyone. I guess kind of going back to the first question, where I've never really thought about my work or these works being exhibited with anyone else. But I think when you put anyone's work next to someone else, it can strengthen the work. And there's a really great exhibition some years ago that I really liked called Disobedient Objects at the V&A. Yeah. And there was a roundtable accompanying the text. So I got this catalog and it was really great, and going through all the images. And then there was, they included the roundtable that was a part of this exhibition. And I believe it was Jack Hammerstein who said the works individually maybe aren't as a collective, they're more powerful as a collective, and that there are connections to be made between all the individual struggles. And I think there's something about that with all the work being together, kind of, I feel at least kind of strengthens my work and kind of positions it in a way that's not just me. It's about other artists, and like Brennan's work and Anna's work, Adrian, Ryan. There's all these like different issues, and Couzyn and Barbara as well, that are important to them. And then I think there's nice connections that Jay and Shannon have been making. And they come out through kind of going around that circle and seeing all the work together. So yeah, I don't know if that answered anything, but just what I've been thinking about with the first question, and then Trevor's question about how they can be read. I think somehow my work is contextualized in a way that I've never really thought about them before. I think it's quite great to see all those works together like
Actually,
that.
Rhonda, I wonder if we can't, based on what Atanas has said, why don't we go to question 3, because that's about resonances between the works.
Right.
Did I ruin it? Did I ruin question 2?
And then
No, we can
we'll
always
go
go
back.
back.
But you, Atanas, I'm really just, no. We'll go back to question 2 after, but you made such a beautiful transition. I feel like we're going to drop what you're saying and then come back to it. So why don't we carry on what you're saying? So Rhonda, do you want to start us off on question 3?
Right, okay. So the works in the show are having a conversation. That conversation is happening after your involvement as makers of the works.
So we wanted to know, are these works saying anything? And Atanas has hinted at this. Are these works saying anything to each other that surprises you? Are there connections or resonance between your work and that of another artist that is unexpected or surprising to you when you first saw the work that was going to be in the show, and then when you thought about it together or saw it together, were you're like suddenly seeing connections there that you might not have initially thought of? Or allegiances? Yeah, Barbara.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here tonight. It's funny because I haven't seen the show in person, but looking at it virtually, I noticed some similarities between, I guess, three bodies of work. I was thinking about Couzyn's work, Adriana and Ryan's work, and also Atanas's work, thinking about barriers. And you touched on this, Trevor, during your intro too, but just thinking about barriers or veils or things that are in kind of like a blockade, something that is kind of keeping you from moving forward. And, thinking about Adriana and Ryan's work with the kind of veil-like quality of some of that, some of the quilt work that's going on, where you're wanting to peer through that material, peer behind, look under to get to that video or sound, and not really being able to access it, but that urge to kind of to get through that barrier. And then, with Couzyn's in particular, the seal skin helium balloons, the way that they've been installed, having to meander through this sort of obstacle course in a way to like read the work, but also to get through to see other parts of the show. It's an interesting kind of, really appreciate that decision to kind of create that physical barrier to moving through. And it's something that you have to kind of achieve. And with Atanas's work, that those stop gaps that fail, and in some ways really funnily, but just that inability to kind of, or that barrier to move forward from one space into the next. And it's something that I hadn't considered when I was first, learning about the concept of the show, until I really saw all of the works come together and realizing there was that kind of similarity between some of the works. And I think there's a lot of other things going on too, like with Anna and Brandon's work, thinking about like maybe fragility, but also kind of an impermanence that's going on too. And I don't hope I can like speak about your work without, seeing it in person, but I have that sense, especially like, with Brennan's work, you can really feel that impermanence because of the fragility of the materials that you're working with, Brendan. But then with Anna, I don't know whether that work is site specific and temporary, but it has that feel like kind of like, like a silhouette wall drawing or something, where you put it up and then once the show's done, you take it down and you can't reinstall, is what it looks like to me, at least. So I have that feeling of like of that impermanence there that I wasn't expecting. I'll leave it at that.
I like what you said about barriers, because your work to me is a central figure in the show, in that the water catchers, it's about this kind of alchemy and transmutation of something, mist into water, and catching something that's almost not there and transforming it into something liquid and formless as well, which I thought is a beautiful thing. And then all of these works have, like Couzyn's work, where you pass through, and your work shows us that, the mist passing through the net is changed. Like it's a barrier, but it's a passage through, but you're changed in the passage through. So I think that's a beautiful connection. I wonder if anybody else has thoughts on some parallels between your works and other works in the show.
I think what's interesting about the show, and especially the gallery itself, it being the Ring Gallery, and Atanas, you had mentioned this earlier before we started getting going, but like how linear it is. Like for a group show, you kind of usually there is maybe some sort of general map, or you feel like you're being guided. But this one is like you either go left or you go right, and then it unfolds either going clockwise or counterclockwise. And so it's really kind of interesting to see what kind of emergent narratives kind of show up in that regard, like thing of like Anna's work transitioning to Adriana's and Ryan's work. And it's like this, it starts with a figurative kind of reference, and then there's the veiled figure, and then with Atanas there is the disappearance of the figure, but it is in reference to these sorts of things. And it's like I think there's some really beautiful emergent narratives that happen through a linear process that kind of forces your brain into kind of thinking about these things. And like my work being like these really illusionary sort of plates or like sheets of paper that are forming this larger truck. And then with Barbara's work, it transitioning to these landscapes that are being pinned and obscured, and like you're faced with the materiality in a similar way to my paper sculptures, but also like with the fabric and that sort of thing. It's pretty interesting, like that kind of that narrative that, and then with Cuisines, it's like, yeah, like there is that sort of traveling through this otherworldly with the balloons, and then ending on such a recognizable sort of rest of this dog, this resting dog. And it's really kind of a nice, well, it's a nice period to a sentence in a lot of ways.
Well, and I think that like analogy of the sentence really resonates for me when I was there installing it. Not everybody's work was up, but when I was installing, and our work in Atanas was just sort of kind of around the corner. So I had a lot of time looking at it as it was installed. That work for me, I was thinking about art pieces in terms of like balance and precarity. That was, I saw that in artwork, but seeing it with Atanas' work, I start to see it in that as well. And I think those are nice little like words that are going together. And so the transition from those pieces really are like a little story, a narrative that gets sort of played out. And it kind of goes back to that first question about how your work changes when it was in a curated context. I think there's something really fascinating in this, and that it is so prescribed in which the way you move, that those connections are so, they just they feed off each other, and it's really beautiful to go around. And then even I noticed Barbara's work was also up on kind of a really formal level. There was just the folds, the bends, the kind of undulations in those pieces. I started thinking back then to our sort of the quilt pieces and the way they're piled. There is like a kind of a beautiful resonance that kind of happens in this space that is kind of fascinating.
And maybe I could add to that, but I was thinking, I was watching the artist videos earlier, rewatching them, and I really liked the way, Anna, you were speaking about collage and gathering, because there was something there that I think it seems like, again, to me, that's a narrative that runs through the show, but it's like a collection of both imagery and materials, and together they're telling a story. So there really is that narrative quality comes through in that idea of collage or bricolage for me. But again, I was just dying to kind of see, Anna, your work up close, to kind of see that pattern and that imagery, and how together that also is sort of telling a story within it, the work itself. As a gatherer myself, a lot of the fabric is found fabric, or collage. I really think of making those quilts as an activity very much like collage, and putting this collage together, I'm making these like, this sort of curtain or collection of patterns or surfaces. And that's happening in Barbara's work too. And then also I was thinking about sealskin with Cousin's work, and that sort of it's silk screened pattern, right, on the mylar. Yeah, so
that's right.
Yeah.
Actually, I was thinking about Anna and Cousin's work because, Anna, in your video, you said, making art already, just doing it, is a form of resistance. You mentioned this idea that also there's not necessarily, I could be wrong about this, but you mentioned this, I think you're saying this idea that a mutual agreement or mutual intelligibility isn't necessarily going to happen, or maybe even always desirable. There's always some kind of unfolding, open-ended aspect to showing your work. And then I was thinking about Couzin's, like, you're in the extra to the exhibition, Couzin's video was just silent and just making the work. And then I thought of the dog bollard, the silent dog bollard. And then I thought of just showing this thing. And it's like, how much access do we have to the artistic process and the choices and the distance that's allowed to be there for your practice? I wonder if either of you could speak to that, or am I way off course? Or
I can just jump in quickly about how I think what's interesting about this, how everything was arranged in the show, is that we didn't necessarily know, like I knew what the other artists were going to be putting in, where they were going to be. We saw the map, we all had access to that map, but I didn't really, know until I got there and saw and experienced the work. And I guess that's a kudos to the curators there to like figure out who goes next to whom. I think that was a very interesting, like for us as artists, it's like we make the work and then you're expecting it to show up in a space that it will make sense. But even as myself, after I saw that my work was installed, I went there and I remember thinking like, oh, that's interesting that it's there next to this. And I'm like seeing for the first time, like the patterns in the quilts in Adriana and Ryan's quilts, like I'm seeing those patterns show up kind of in my work. I'm also thinking about like thematically the water carriers. I have like these 3 figures carrying water and how that might have a thematic link to Barbara's water catchers. So, and then also just the figurative work, and then disappearing into just more structural things. So I think the art, the whole theme of, for the further apart things are, we're all kind of in our own bubble making these things, but then when you put them together, everything is separated, but there's just a way to kind of connect to them all individually and in a never ending way. And I think you can do that by looking on the screen, but being there in person as well really kind of helps to, create these new links between all the works and all the artists that are there. So I think I didn't really answer the question about the resistance factor, but I think, I'll let Couzyn jump in if he wants to.
I think just going back to the other questions and some of the things that have been said, like those relationships between the works, and even kind of how your idea about your own work changes in relationship to the other works, and it feels like that's still happening. Like even as we're talking now, like I'm picking up on what other people are thinking about, and really thinking about how that will impact my work. And even even when I was creating the work, a lot of it was responding to some of the conversations that I was having with Jay and Shannon, because it was, when we first started talking, the world was a different place even, but even in my practice, I was in a different place. And then, the work, even just the work that was going to be included in the show changed a number of times. And then even, and that was based on the conversations we were having, and we check in every once in a while, and then talk about the show some more. And then I'd want to change the work, or I would think like, oh, I have this other work that suits this conversation that we've had better. And then, hearing the other artists talk, it's like it not that there were missing pieces, but I can see where, because I was talking with Jay and Shannon, and then so I can see where those conversations were informed. Like, so it kind of opens it up a little bit. Like I can see those relationships a little more clearly, and even just the work I was working on, as I often do. Maybe this isn't the best, but I work on the work until it's ready to go out the door. And so I still feel like I'm in it. Like I still feel like I'm making that piece, because it hasn't existed long enough in the world for me to be able to say with any certainty that this is what it's about. And it's because I was thinking about so many different things, and they're all kind of demanding attention, or they're like, I don't know what the main ideas are, because I came to these from so many different spots. But it's really interesting to hear some of the relationships from the other artists. And I'm rambling a little bit, but I think I'm thinking about there's a lot of talk of barriers, and the dog bollard. It's like I'm kind of, it still feels like a work in progress, because I'd like to see it in the world as a bollard, as a physical, literal barrier. But then it's, you know, the dog is a different kind of thing, and you know, it's also about rest, and it's about migration and travel, and so they're, you know, and especially for, I'm really rambling now, and I can feel myself going on to a tangent that I'm not going to be able to slow down on, but I am appreciating the conversation and thinking about gathering, as well as you know, like the fish steaks and the avatuk balloons are like a harvest. I'm gonna rein it in a little bit. I don't want to take over the conversation, but I'm responding to a lot of what everybody's saying.
I don't think you're going on. I mean, we're taking turns, and I think we all answer. Actually, that's what's interesting about the group shows, because when you go through it, you might respond to certain works immediately, and other ones it kind of later on comes to you like something. And I think Couzyn, the way you're reacting to the questions even is a bit like that, where you're thinking about them and you're listening to everybody talk, and then it comes out. And I love that process. You know, you're answering them kind of in a different, you know, in a different order, but then it all ties it all back together. It's quite nice.
Actually, Cuisine, I was curious when I was there, I couldn't figure out for sure or not, but were the fish slices, were that packed in a box and shipped in the box that you see in the gallery? Was that how that arrived there?
Yeah, they're shipped in that box, but that box was also in another box.
Oh,
yeah, and I would have just shipped them in that box, but that box had been shipped before, so I can't have it falling apart. But it's very obvious that it's been through some transit. It's a little beat up, and it's got kind of remnants of stickers and labels and things like that. But it did ship in that box, but then it also shipped in the second box. So one box is artwork, and then the other box is the shipping box. And I tried to make that very clear, because that's really confusing, especially because it's, you know, I'm shipping work on pallets, and I'm making work that is pallets, and I'm like, the work is made of boxes, and then these fish steaks look like packing peanuts, and there are all these kind of things about you know, transit and migration and shipping goods and globalization, and so I'm using materials and language that kind of speak to that. But then it's you know, I don't want you know, the work to get broken down and recycled or something. Not that would ever happen. I just like, I'm not trying to confuse anybody, but I'm trying to like use the language of those materials. So it's and I probably worry too much about that stuff anyway, but that's part of it. I don't know. I'll get off topic really quickly. So I'll, anytime I start talking, I worry that I'm going to bring the conversation into this other weird, faraway place. But
that's what we're hoping for. That's exactly what we want.
Did you want to move on to another question, Trevor? Or...
Yeah, why don't we go to question 4? It's 7:47. Okay. Let's go to question 4.
Oh, Lord. Okay. So the pieces in the exhibition engage with acts of critique, protest, or resistance, but not in an obvious or declarative way, such as with a protest sign, a form of communication which usually leaves no room for interpretation. In Adriana's and Brian's work, quilts operate as baffles, which overlap speakers and megaphones. Opacity and formal place are important to many of the works. Barbara's works first engaged the viewer formally and physically before revealing their connection to issues such as insufficient water supplies.
So we're just wondering if some of you could speak about what we are provisionally calling, and you can redefine it or argue against the word, but we are calling quiet protests. And I think actually that word was used somewhere in the conversation. So can you speak about your use of this form of quiet protest and your choice to engage with these acts of critique or resistance within the form of art and with all these layers of opacity and misdirection and so on?
Shall I go first? Shall I talk?
Sure, yeah.
Barbara, I'll pass you. When I originally started working with these textiles, they were out of a practical, they were made out of a practical solution for a public site-specific installation we were doing, where we literally had to quiet down a space that we had created to record sound in. And then I became more interested in the quilts as objects, and started making them more clearly and with more direction during the time of the women's marches that were happening. I was thinking of them as a way to, again, following up on what Atanas was saying about a quiet protest or a quiet act of solidarity. I was thinking of themes of protection and sheltering that I had worked, or that we both work with in previous works, and really stripping that down to something as simple as a quilt. And, you know, that modified and changed as we were making the work, and Ryan would then manipulate and use these quilts within the videos, almost as props or supplements. But yeah, it really changed over the time that we were making these things. And I think we really saw them then as a stand-in for voices or sound, and maybe actually like a graphic depiction of sound, and being blatantly, sort of loud, but not loud at the same time. Loud in color or form, but not in actual sound.
And quiet in gesture too. I think with the videos, for me, it was Adriana would make essentially the process of us working right now for these pieces, where Adriana was working on these quilts, and previously we had been working like in a very tight collaborative form in our sort of more public sculptures and sound pieces like that. And with this process, Adriana was in the studio making the quilts, and she just handed them to me, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to take these and do something with them, sort of more of a call and response in terms of our collaboration, because we hadn't really done that before, and it was really quite liberating and exciting to sort of just get this material to work with. But like I had kind of said earlier, I was in there thinking about communication, about voice, but thinking a very like interpersonal way, almost about like how people communicate, and we're in a collaborative relationship. Like these were things I was thinking about. The world changes when you're making that work, and then all of a sudden it's infused in there. And so I really then started thinking about, well, it's not quieting voices. What the materials are really used for in a really practical sense, like sound blankets, is they're used to actually make sound more audible, to make it clearer, to actually make a space for listening. So for me, that's really what it's about. It's not about quieting this or making that loud. It's, you know, you jam a blanket in front of a bullhorn, you could still hear it, but it's brought that level down, and it's sort of increasing silence, decreasing that noise, and sort of getting a space where there is a space for communication. So and then in my physical body, in those pieces, I'm actually physically balancing or rocking and sort of trying to develop that equilibrium. So for me, it was a balance between, they are quiet protests, but that wasn't the intention I had going into it. And again, back to that original question, that's kind of what's I really find fascinating about the piece, that people grab onto that, and not grab onto it, but that component about the quiet protest, it resonates with people, and it's a current. And that the work kind of molds and shapes itself around these ideas, and then you know, it kind of moves on and lives someplace else in another capacity. So the protest element to me is just, I think, a really exciting, and well, it just makes me really, not to be kind of cheesy about, but the power that art has to form and reflect and kind of interpret kind of the space we're in at a particular time. I think that's what's so fascinating about it. And then with everybody's work, going back and seeing it at different times and how it resonates for me.
I wonder if we can get another answer in for this question, then we can open it up to Barbara. Did you have your?
Yeah, if that's okay. Yeah, I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about the fog catching nets that are present in my work. So some of the images that are found in the work in the show are of fog catchers. And I didn't really realize when I went to visit them, I went to central Chile to see them. I didn't realize that their use was in part necessary because of the copper mining that's happening in the north of Chile. And that's a very water intensive process, which sucks up a lot of groundwater, which is privatized. And so it leaves very little water for people living within that particular village and other areas. So the village of Pina Blanca, but other areas of Chile as well, leaves little groundwater for, you know, regular everyday use. Not to mention the pollution that happens because of the copper mining, which pollutes the water, right? So I didn't realize I get there. I'm just looking at these nets in almost a formal way. And then I'm learning about all of these, the environmental impacts. And, you know, over time using this net imagery, I'm starting to think about my own, like the ways in which I'm complicit in this environmental degradation. A lot of these copper mining companies are Canadian. And then, you know, the use of copper is like in our everyday life, as it's like integral to, you know, the screen that I'm looking at right now. And it is what facilitates networks, networks, connections across time and space, and how I benefit from that, right? And so as I'm using these images, I'm thinking about all of these things, as I'm mentioning, and feeling like, while the work is not protest, it's not like a form of protest, I want to at least honor the work that people are doing there by at least describing some of these issues, you know, in that video that we have in the show, letting people know where that image is coming from, and some of the hard work that people are doing, and then just calling attention to larger issues of water insecurity, not just in Chile, but elsewhere. Maybe I'll leave it at that. I can go on, but I know we're kind of pressed a little bit for time.
So I think, thank you guys for the conversation. Actually, it was really interesting for me, and I just loved hearing you guys talk amongst each other, you addressing each other, and it was really interesting to me to see the dynamic. So is there questions that we want to ask from the audience? Just I'll just ask Aaliyah.
Yeah, so we have a couple questions queued up that I will ask everyone. But first, thank you everyone for those wonderful answers. I know that it can be kind of tricky to speak on a panel and to be vulnerable and speak about your art, but this was really wonderful. So thank you. Our first question is, what role does provisionality play in your art practice, and how does that relate to the theme of the further apart things seen? I know everybody's super eager to answer.
I think it's for me, it's a kind of a newish sort of thing, like that provisionality, like that, the temporary kind of feel, a look, because my practice usually is within ceramics, which is, and it's like the way I work in ceramics is very intentional and very crafted and very rendered. So like this is kind of a new kind of jam in this new body of work. So and I think that sort of also speaks to the sort of the vulnerability of the work as well. Like I feel like there's a rawness to it in this body of work that I kind of enjoy. In terms of how it relates to the show, like I think again, kind of having those conversations, those difficult conversations, and just being kind of raw and sort of in between with like your ideas. And it's like, you know, it seems like, especially politically over the last 5 years, 6 years, it's just been like raw emotions that people are feeling and expressing. So, and not eloquently either, as we can see daily on Twitter. So it's interesting. I think that's kind of where I would sit with it.
Great. Does anybody else want to answer, or do Jay and Shannon maybe want to come back and hop in on some of the questions as well? I think some of them might be relevant to the curatorial practice of it, if you want. Oh, welcome. Hello.
Yeah, I don't have much to say about that. I just want to thank everyone for speaking, because this is a super big treat to listen to you, what you all have to say. Like, it's really a huge honor. It's like, you know, you get, it's, I don't know, curation is such a funny thing. And I spend years like trying to hone something, and then to hear you all articulate beyond kind of what we were thinking about is a real joy.
I loved hearing people describing other people's work. I mean, it's just so amazing to me that what people's sensitivities to what's happening in other works. I found that so interesting.
Wonderful. So with that said, the next question is, group exhibitions provide artists with the opportunity to connect with other artists and curators, communities, and a chance to exchange ideas. And sometimes artists can be marginalized and really need these opportunities. So since this exhibition ended up happening during COVID, was all of this kind of lost, or are there moments where online or in-person connection and exchanges of ideas just kind of happen despite the situation? Or what differences did you notice in, I guess, the online environment versus what might have happened if you were all in the same place, able to meet and work together, meet in person?
Wanted to say thank you for Zoom. That made all the difference for us, you know, with everything, having some initial conversations and then things going into lockdown. But to be able, you know, we had an extended period of time to be able to develop the show because of delays, and luckily we were able to use it because we had, you know, we never got to see each other in person during the process of developing the show, but being able to do Zoom was hugely beneficial. And you know, we got to know each other because we did multiple check-ins, and you know, you didn't have to schedule so far in advance, like, oh, you know, you could do things a little bit more on the fly. And you know, we could talk to Brendan and see him, and you know, even though he's on the other side of the country, and you know, everybody is pretty geographically distant to a certain degree, and we were all forced to be distant. Even Jay and I had to do so many Zoom things, so that had a big role in keeping the connections possible. I don't know that the show would have happened otherwise, to be honest. Like, it was really important to be able to, it was the kind of show that we needed to have a lot of discussions, and it's just so gratifying, like, to echo what Jay's saying too, to actually have you guys all here on this one platform is like, I couldn't ask for anything better. It's been such a real pleasure to hear from all of you talking together. I wish we could do it all the time.
I do have an answer to the provisionality question. I have to think about it a little bit. There's two things that were very provisional for me putting this show together. One of them is Atanas, working with him in Calgary, taking photos, taking the ramp photos. You know, that happened very late in the process. And it really, I think some of the work in the show, you know, we have sort of people that are thinkers that are kind of directed or have a design sensibility. Those artists I never really had any questions about because I knew they would solve whatever their problems were. But with Atanas, you know, I have a long history with him, and he left it to keep me on the edge there, both Shannon and I. And it's very rewarding to teach me that and to show us the trust that it takes and how you can pull that together and make a statement as strong as you did. So I just want to thank you for that. And Couzyn, on the other end, there's a person that's very, we would always call Couzyn. We don't really email converse with you. And that dog bollard came in, what, 2 weeks before? 1 week before the show? So yeah, it's something that's so solid, such a big period to the end of the sentence, as I think Brendan said that. But it has, in my mind, such a fleeting quality. Yeah, and to use rest as an idea of resistance is a really interesting opening. So thank you for that.
No, thanks for I mean, thanks for the trust. First of all, trusting that the piece would come in, because I know it was changing right up until it was supposed to ship. It's the piece. It's the piece it was meant to be for the, especially for the show. But as we talked about it, there were material changes, and I made it a lot bigger than it was initially going to be, and so the difficulty went up and the timeline got shorter, and there were a lot of challenges there, but I was able to kind of make those changes because I felt they needed to be made, and there was, I didn't think, I wasn't worried about it, because you said that you trusted, that you trusted me, and then I don't need to say more than that, I think. So I'll just I'll leave it there. But yeah.
Great. We have another question, kind of a big one. I feel like everyone's going to introduce really diverse answers for this one. So when you create your work and discuss its meaning, do you build it to be understood by others or to answer questions for yourself? So in other words, are you hoping to learn more about who you are, or are you hoping others learn about you? Perhaps both? What does this mean to you? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I'll start this off. Just kind of thinking about the ramp works that I've done over the years, and thinking about access and accessibility, and thinking about them as like a quiet activist or quiet protest. The most satisfying thing that's come out of the works has been a lot of people have been messaging me, emailing me, sending me pictures of ramps they come across. And I think for the first time, people have been just thinking about ramps or noticing them. And it's something I've been noticing my whole life, and it makes my life a little bit easier. It makes some people's lives a lot easier. And I've got a great collection of photos of ramps, provisional ramps, all the different types of sorry, it's late over here. Stopgap ramps in Toronto, and just everything that they've come across that has made accessibility a little bit easier for people. And just getting that from people has kind of been really rewarding for me. Rewarding, I know it can be kind of cheesy in this way as an artist to say that, but people have been noticing access and accessibility and ramps. And yeah, that's kind of all I really wanted from the works. I wasn't really trying to solve any issues when it comes to access and accessibility. Those are bigger issues than I can solve as an artist, but starting a conversation with people, maybe debates about the need for them. But yeah, I think for me, it's maybe not so much about sharing something that I go through so much for myself, but maybe getting other people to kind of just notice a few things that maybe they haven't noticed before. That's been really great for me. So, yeah.
I can also answer that question about whether you want someone to see the art as something that you're trying to tell them, or whether you're trying to get something out of the art when you're making it yourself. For me, I think there's like a balance between both. I think for me, when I make something, I am trying to learn something about what I'm thinking about, or something that I'm trying to articulate, maybe not in words, but with images. So there's that relationship you have with the art making, but then there's also, yeah, some kind of expectation, I think, for somebody else to have a different interpretation of that. And maybe things can come up that you hadn't thought about once someone else reads it. So I think there's like, for me, it's more of like it's like constantly in dialogue. I don't think you can say definitely like, I want people to understand this, because maybe, I think it's like things are always in tension or in conversation or in conflict. And I think that's kind of, for me, what drives me to make art or make an artwork, is that yeah, that there's still an element of discovery or a chance to discover something. It's not like definite, I think.
There's something really nice about the process too, and I think, sort of leading off what you're talking about, it's this idea that I think when we go into the work, me anyway, particularly, I go in always thinking that, okay, these are ideas I'm thinking about and sort of playing around with. And it's always kind of, even now, after all these years, it's still surprising when somebody comes up and starts talking about it and points out something in that work that you hadn't seen before. And it's really kind of about you. And it's a very sobering and a moment where you're like, oh yeah, that is really about, whatever at that point. And I think there's something really, I think sometimes as artists, you try to, you think you have this sort of process down that you're working to get to these sort of answers or to explore some area, and then somebody comes out of left field and brings it back, and it's like, oh no, it's really kind of about you exploring who you are in the world at this point. And I find that always kind of fascinating, that kind of flip back and forth. So it's sort of, it's a difficult thing to strategize in any way, or to kind of be too like engaged with almost. It's sort of, I feel like it sort of comes to you in sort of different ways, for me anyway.
Just quickly, I wanted to say that like very rarely am I successful in trying to like convey my intentions. So like anytime I try to make work that has like a some sort of narrative, or if I try to make the work illustrative of an idea, it like fails. Like the feedback I get is always different from what my expectations and intentions were. So I've kind of learned over the years to just sort of let go of trying to communicate certain ideas and let the process and the research carry the work, and then open it up to an audience. And really that's how I learn what the work is doing, is through, especially this process with Jay and Shannon. So much of what the work is doing, I learned through them. And I've learned to just sort of run with it instead of going, oh, that's not what I meant, or I wanted it to be like this. It's like, no, this is what the work is saying. It's where it's going. It's where it's leading me now. And I feel much more confident letting the work lead me into the next piece. Where that, earlier years, I was a little bit afraid of that. So I'd say thanks to Shannon and Jay and to all, to everyone for helping me put my work into a context. It's been really an amazing privilege.
Wonderful. Does anybody else want to answer that question? No. Okay. Then perhaps this will be the last question. It's directed towards Jay and Shannon. It's a very excited question, inquiring about whether or not there will be a trilogy.
Kind of working on it, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. We're not sure.
No comment.
We're still working together. Let's put it that way. We're still, the things are happening. Things are happening. We'll see where it lands.
Always things to expect. Wonderful. With that, we are a couple minutes away from the end. So if there are any questions, are there any questions that you have for one another? Are there any closing remarks, things that you would like to say before we go on our way? I see a lot of thinking faces.
I just wanted to say thank you to everybody, and especially to Jay and Shannon for really pulling this together through a really challenging time, and to keep us going. There was a lot of times where we were like, what are we doing? And especially now, should we even be making art right now? Like, is this the right time to have this conversation? But I think your confidence in this group of people coming together to create this bigger conversation was really important to us during this kind of very crazy time. And I think it really helped to know that the rest of the artists in the group were thinking about similar things tangentially, and it just it really came together, and I think it's a really strong exhibition. I just really want to see it in person. Thank you, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, that feeling's very mutual too for Jay and I, if I can speak for Jay. Like to have the momentum of the show and to know that we were also sort of culpable to all of you too, and to keep working and be patient and see the show through. I do feel like, I mean, we're as equally grateful for all your patience and encouragement and sticking with it.
Amazing. Great. Well, thank you everyone for this wonderful panel. Thank you, Trevor and Rhonda, for moderating. You did a great job, and everybody for engaging and sharing your answers and your insights. It's been super wonderful. That said, I hope to see everybody at future programming at CC, but in the meantime, I'm sure I'll see everyone at the gallery sometime soon, because we have some great exhibitions on right now, like the Further Apart Things scene, which goes until May 22nd in our Ring Gallery. So thank you, everyone. Super excited to have done this, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.